Hello, everybody, and welcome. We'll take a few minutes here as people come on to the session. My name is Mark Radcliffe. I'm an advocacy director for Edmentum. We'll just take a couple of moments here as people join the session. Welcome to today's session. This is Perspectives, Edmentum's a virtual event series. We gather educators from across the country to talk about the topics that are top of mind to all of you right now. Today, we're going to talk about equity and how we can make sure all students succeed. I said this already, but I'll say it again. My name is Mark Radcliffe. I'll be your host. I'm the Learning and Enablement Advocacy Director here at Edmentum. Our team, we're the advocacy team, so we help identify and raise the voices of a lot of different educators, and particularly today we're talking to a couple of innovative educators that have some great ideas for strategies, insights, expertise. This particular topic of equity is pretty close of mind for me too, because in addition to being the advocacy director for Edmentum, I'm also the chairperson for the We Can Learn Foundation, which is a charitable donation arm of Edmentum that supports learners in commonly underserved communities to make sure that they have access to various learning opportunities that they otherwise wouldn't. So it's really hits home for me too, this particular session. I'm looking to get a lot of ideas out of it as well. Now, as you think about this topic across the United States, adequate and equitable education opportunity is really far from a reality for many of our students of color, students from low-income families, and generally underserved student populations. And I think, as educators, we agree that it's really our collective responsibility to ensure that young people have equal access to high-quality education, but ultimately that there's nothing that limits them from reaching the potentials that are out there for them. Our goal has never been more important today because we have a fast-growing knowledge economy that's coupled with increasing rates of poverty, and more families are getting left behind. So it's really top of mind. We have two experts here today that are real deep knowledge and thinkers in this area and have had many years to bring deep understanding and expertise to this work. So what I'll do is I'll introduce them, and then through that introduction, we'll allow them to share their mission as well. So first of all, we have Shomari Jones, Director of Equity and Strategic Engagement in Bellevue School District up in Washington State. Welcome, Shomari. So as a way of introducing yourself, Shomari, how would you describe your role as Director of Equity and Strategic Engagement? I'm sure there's an acronym in there too, if you have that. But somewhere. Describe your role to us. Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Excuse me, and thanks for having me, and welcome everyone. Apologies in advance. I am struggling a little bit with the flu today, and so the next time I bend over, it'll be to pick up my very heavy puffy coat, not because I want to look more fashionably cute, but because I am super cold inside of this very warm office. But thank you again. I am the Director of Equity. A part of my role in summary is to create a level or layer of disruption within our system that helps to advance the integrity of how we serve our students, family, and community as a whole. In that, I am constantly looking for metrics, data, and strategies to make sure that, knowing that we won't be able to turn the key and flip the switch on transforming systems as education systems are cemented in the way that they do things, I'm looking for progress and the ability to highlight what we can be doing perpetually to give people examples of how to move the needle and how to provide access to those who historically have not had access before.
No worries, and thank you for being with us today, even in your slightly lower state than normal. It's all good. And the puffy coat, I mean, it does look good. So I would just say own the puffy coat. I saw it earlier, everybody. Looks great. So our next panelist is Kerrie Torres. Kerrie is the Assistant Superintendent at Newport Mesa Unified School District and down in Southern California. Kerrie, same question ultimately. How does your role of Assistant Superintendent really afford you the opportunity to drive equity reform in your district?
Good morning, everyone, and that's an excellent question. And I have the pleasure of serving secondary schools. So in my current role, I serve students in grades 7 through 12 in California. And one of the wonderful pieces of Southern California is diversity. And so I exist at work in a very blended and diverse community. We serve the population of both Costa Mesa and Newport Beach, which is a blend of all different types of individuals, poverty levels, different types of communities, which is one of the reasons that I was attracted to coming here, to really be able to provide access to students, access for students for what they actually need. And so one of the things that I get to focus on is ensuring that our students in secondary schools are receiving and have access to and are experiencing an educational program that meets them where they're at and what they need. And so when we look at equity in our district, we're looking at not necessarily providing the same thing to all students, but really drilling down and saying, what do the students at this particular school in this particular community need? And at times, like Shomari mentioned, that can be a disruption to the system. And that's our role, is to ensure that we're not status quo. It's our role to ensure that we're continuing to move our students forward. And that's an ever-changing continuum that our students are on. And it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm paying attention to that and being responsive.
Yeah, there was some really great themes there. I love Shomari saying disrupt. How do I disrupt? Was a great word. The literal idea of having a job where you work out how to disrupt things just sounds pretty cool to begin with. And Kerrie, something that I know we hear a lot. We'll go into a poll in here in a second, but this idea of equity is not about the same thing for all. It's like people should be able to get to whatever place they need to get to based on the things that they need. So it's not about uniformity, right? Like that's not what equity is. So yeah, I very much appreciate that. Let's jump off that into the first poll, just to kind of get a feel from the people who are attending here today. But when you, attendee, think about this statement or your definition of equity, go ahead and respond to the poll here. It should pop right up on your screen. There are a few different definitions that you can choose from. We do our best to on these polls to hit different areas. So I'd say pick the one that's closest to your definition. And as we're waiting for those responses, we'll take a look at them coming in. I see we have quite a few coming in already, actually, so we're doing pretty well. But providing all students with high quality resources, tailoring resources and opportunities, that kind of speaks to what Kerrie was saying there a moment ago, and addressing disparities. It's more of that sort of negative side of that conversation, but then also helping specific populations, as that last part there, students with disabilities, to access to general curriculum. So I think we're at a good spot here. We have some good responses, so we'll go ahead and share out those results. But I think, Kerrie, I feel like people are kind of agreeing with you to your statement there. That second one includes tailoring resources and opportunities to meet individual student needs. You feel like that connects well into the statement that you made earlier. So let's keep that as a thread as we go through here. That idea of tailoring to particular students, and maybe those practicals of how we do that. So those particular responses were from Education Week, but we're not necessarily just talking about equity through the lens of accessibility to content, but in a broader sense. When we say equity, we're talking about access to quality educational experience in general for students as well. So very good. So as we look at that, let's start with Kerrie to go into a little bit more detail. How did those equity conversations you have in general contribute to the response in your district when you had that disrupted learning, over the last few years? How did equity and that idea of tailoring that you already talked about, how did that play out in those sort of extreme circumstances?
I think prior to the pandemic, we were still operating on the concept of just current structures, and we weren't really taking a deep dive into student needs. And one of the positive things that came of the pandemic was that during that time, we had to be responsive and we had to make changes very quickly. And as we emerged from that, one of the things we noted is that we could and we did find ways to reach all students. And so one of the things that we tried to do was not lose touch of that when we came back and we were back in person and kind of resumed to normal. Some of the resources that we created and or purchased or the structures we created that were moving us through the pandemic were absolutely essential to maintain and keep for students so that we can continue to reach their need. That was really important for us because we assumed that we would just go back to normal, and we assumed that we'd do things the way we were going to always do them. And what we found out was we were able to reach a large number of students in different ways. And so one of the things that we were able to do is, as I kind of describe it, as really manipulating the structure of the way we've run secondary schools. And so it's been pretty traditional. Certain courses are offered in a certain mechanism and certain students attend those classes. And we were able to really fracture that system in a positive way where we created increased access to courses. We maintained our digital programs. We maintained the digital school that we had created during the pandemic. And we also placed digital systems within the high school settings. And so it's just been something that we've been able to really tackle as we work one-on-one with some of our most at-risk students. And at-risk, not necessarily academically, just at-risk for not having access and opportunity.
And you had talked about, we had the assumption we would return to normal. That, it's a phrase we heard a lot, right? And I think that there's a lot of comfort for people returning to normal. Did that drive any resistance to that idea of maintaining some of these services when you came back in person, or did you kind of get lucky and people embraced the best parts of that remote learning opportunities that you had?
I think we had a mixed response because we had teachers who had never used digital learning systems or management systems, and they found the benefit of it, actually. And so that was kind of a rainbow for a lot of our teachers as they realized, wow, I can house all of this information. Students can have access 24 hours and do lots of different types of learning opportunities away from me. So that was exciting. I think what the challenge was as a district structure and the way that we dedicate resources to schools, that was the conversation. Because it's like, well, we typically don't give that, or we typically don't assign this, or that's one too many teachers for this campus. So that's really where the question became, is how do we assign resources, and who and how do we do that? And should we follow the same formulas and structures that we've had in the past? Because we're seeing that our teachers are interested in doing something different, and we have mechanisms to do it. And that might create a different level of investment that we've made in the past.
Yeah. I love that phrase. There's a rainbow for teachers. That's the one I'm stealing. I don't feel like I've heard that one before. I don't know if that's a geographical phrase, or is that a common one that you use? I feel like I want to dig into that. Maybe that's for a different discussion. But, have you heard that one before, Shomari? That it's a rainbow for teachers?
I'm stealing it too. Thank you for that offering, Kerrie.
We have positive rainbows in California, and so we try to, I tried to say it positively so that it really was the bright spot in the COVID experience.
Was it a double rainbow? That's the ultimate question, because those are so intense. That's what I heard from YouTube. Okay, excellent. So let's move to Shomari for a moment. You've been leading equity conversations in Bellevue for years and years. Same sort of thing for you. What have you learned? What have you brought out of that disruption in learning that we had, and how is it kind of driving what you do now?
Before I respond to that, I want to say one quick thing about the poll. And I'm still looking at the poll and the variation and definitions that were offered for folks. I do want to say that if you're doing any of these things, good on you. Good on you, because there's no wrong answer to this. Yep. Like, all of these things need to be done to fold into the work that we call equity. But there may be more to do and more, distance to go. So further exploration is always welcomed, but I want to give you kudos if this is if the selection that you chose or would have chosen is not the one that has the longest bar. Do note that, like, we see and we appreciate the efforts that you're putting forth. During the pandemic, the height of the pandemic, I was very appreciative of the shifts that we had to make, because those shifts caused us to do some deep introspection and go to the source, to ask the source, what is it that you feel that you need in order to thrive in this environment? And some of those were simple surveys, some of those were focus groups, but we took from our people what their needs were, and we created an infrastructure that really met the needs of those people. One thing I appreciated the absolute most was when I heard students say, "I couldn't make it to class today, but because it was on Microsoft Teams, it was able to be recorded, and I was able to watch the class session afterwards, so that I was fully immersed in what the learning was that day, even though I wasn't in attendance on that day." And it was such a beautiful strategy that things could be recorded and then cataloged for further review later on. We lost many of those things due to the magneticism of normalcy that seems to unfortunately betray this system. We have an innate inability to move fast forward before we get stuck in the mud and where we are. And so, yes, we have some nuanced realizations of what the needs of our community are. But I would say that there was a very swift interest in getting kids back into the normalcy of that grind, 7-hour period. You know, we have 7 periods, not all districts do it, 7 periods. In person, not a lot of hybrid opportunity. And, you know, the same level of rigor that we discovered was not what the students were asking for. They really wanted something different. And so, sadly to say that some of the things have not sustained post-pandemic, post the height of the pandemic, but we are constantly continuing to drum up resources within our community to combat what that normalcy feels like. Right now we have a cadre of individuals who are in our advanced learning program combating advanced learning. Like, that's amazing because of the social and emotional stress that it provides for some of our students as they matriculate through some of the programming. Or we have students who are at the forefront of combating SROs and school resource officers or police officers in buildings because we didn't have those for the first year of coming back after we were out for the pandemic, and now they're asking why. And so for me, I think that one of the best and greatest benefits of the post-pandemic era is that we have, whether we wanted to or not, provided a platform of empowerment for our stakeholders to step into this conversation in a way that they weren't previously included. And they are rising up in a very powerful way and saying what they want and what they need.
And I assume students are a major part of when you say stakeholders, right? Your actual learners themselves. How are they getting their point across? What are the literal mechanisms that you have put in place to help them do that?
I have a couple of committees that are amazing. One is a student advisory committee where I bring to the meeting the most controversial topics that impact students, and I invite some of the key leaders of our organization to hear from the students' voice. We promote and try to facilitate students attending our school board meetings that happen every 2 weeks to provide something during public comment to ensure that the board members know what is not working well for them. And then, you know, I just try as best as possible to leave myself as an open door to whatever students feel that their needs are. And so I promote as much as possible. Email me, call me on my work cell, you know, get in touch with me if you have a complaint or an issue. And there's an onslaught. I get a pouring of context from our community as to what needs to transform or change, which is powerful. And not just our students. Like, I can never leave out our parents and our families. Our families are an extension of the student voice, and what our students go through, our families go through as well. And so I just want to make sure that in my role, as I facilitate this role, that I am providing as much access to resource to those two populations as possible.
Yeah, I promise I'll give you a voice break here in 1 second, but I just have one
problem.
more, which was you were giving so much opportunity for people to tell you their problems, right? The things that they struggle with, the inequities that they have. What would you say to people watching this who are saying, I don't know if I'm ready to receive that? Like that I'm either stressed, I don't feel prepared. What would your advice be to somebody that's in that spot where they're not ready to open that door yet?
I mean, I have a couple of different versions of advice. I'll give the gentle one first. The gentle one is that we have to find someone who is ready. You know, if it's not you, then who? It is very important that as we do work for others, this is servant leadership. As we're doing work for others, we want to make sure that we are on this continual cycle of improvement. That means checking yourself. That means checking what you're doing on a consistent basis. That means analyzing and surveying. And sometimes that means transforming what it is that you're doing to meet the needs of the community that you serve. Sometimes you may not be prepared for that, but that is what absolutely needs to happen. And my lesser gentle advice is if you're not the right person to be in the space to receive that information, then it's time to shift into a role where that is not your responsibility, you know, and make sure that there's someone is in that role who can be responsible for that particular body of work. You know, I think of myself in my leadership and the things that I'm good at and the things that I'm not. Okay. And I hire for the people, I hire for those spaces where I'm not excellent to ensure that we have a well-rounded department that serves the needs of our entire community. So, you know, if there's this thing over here that someone else is better at, then I'm sending them to serve that need.
Yeah. I love that it's just a non-negotiable at the end of it. It's like, we're doing this. We just need to put the right person. Well, take a voice break, Shomari. Kerrie, let's bounce to you. There was some really great, very specific advice from Shomari there, and I'll leave it up to you here. You can either bounce off of what he was saying, but we did have a question in the QA too, which was if there are specific examples of specific support you're able to put in place to remove barriers for students that had a big impact. You can take it either way you would like on this next question, and then we'll jump into a poll here in just a moment.
Yeah, and I do agree and connect with Shomari's comments about if you're, you know, there has to be a level of preparation to do this type of work. You can't use the E word if you're not prepared to actually execute what you need to get done. I think, you know, there are steps you can take and structures you can put in place to help the process and conversation centered around equity. You know, as a district level administrator, I'm getting feedback and input, like Shomari talked about, from students to parents to staff. I mean, everybody's kind of providing information into the conversation, and you have to be prepared to respond to that. And sometimes that feels awkward because you're like, oh, like, I don't know if we can tackle that. Like, that just might not be something our district's prepared to do yet. And so what you end up doing is creating forums and task force and groups of people who can help continue to move the conversation and create ideas and structures to be able to invest in those equitable actions that you're trying to achieve. There's a lot of groundwork that's done, I feel, when you're having equity conversations, because not everybody has the definition of equity in the same manner. And so when you're going out to communities and you're going out to students, their vantage points are different because their definition of equity shifts. And so part of that is us kind of setting the stage and defining that and sharing our vision as a district for what equity means to us and how we see us achieving equity in our community. So many of the many of the board meetings and public forums that we have are venues for people to be able to share their thoughts with us, but it's also our venue to share with them our philosophical ideas centered around equity.
Yeah. What are some specific activities or successes that you feel like you've really had? You know, a lot of times when people come to these sessions, it's like, what's sort of one thing I can do tomorrow, right, to adjust this? So there are things that you've seen, particularly this year, in that sort of coming out of pandemic year, that you've really found have helped move the needle?
So, for example, right now, my current work is we're looking at educational opportunities for students who aren't are not feeling like they're a traditional high school student. They don't want the 7-hour day, 7 periods. They don't want athletics. They don't want any of that. You know, their time during the pandemic may have been harder on them. Their new life is a little bit different. And so now we're looking at these educational options. That's an equitable experience because I'm trying to provide a program to them that's going to give them a similar cognitive load and learning experience, but in a different setting. And so right now we are working with our community to create what I'm calling an educational options program. And that is a responsive program looking at student data, so student academic data, student socio-emotional learning data that we've collected, direct feedback from the students who are asking for the programs, and principal task force to be able to do this. And it is truly an equity initiative because if you look at what do our 9 through 12 students need and are asking for to achieve a college and career readiness program for themselves in 2022 and 2023, that looks different. So that's an actual initiative that started at the end of last year that's carried on to this year. And when I open school next year, we will have that in place.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the idea of bringing the community in as well, you know, for people listening, there's some real nuggets in what Kerrie said there, but I feel like involving the community was a major part, and connecting back to that whole idea of like these venues are for the voice of the community, but it's also ways for us to bring our voice to them. Shomari, I feel like you have a thought. You came off mute there, so I'll give you an opportunity.
I was just writing a couple things down that was addressing that question that came from the attendee.
Yeah.
Not all of these examples are easy lifts. Some of them will require, you know, the triple T, time, talent, and treasure, you know. And if we have people who are committed to serving students, we might be able to get to so many things. So we transformed our harassment, intimidation, and bullying practices based on our students' needs, you know, based on what they told us. They thought it was relatively unclear. They thought that the language needed to be different. They wanted to be heard more than what they felt that they were being heard based on experiences that they were having. We had a massive uptick in harassment virtually during the pandemic when we shifted to virtual learning. So we had to rearrange how we serve students differently and how they were able to access feeling supported. I spoke a little bit to the Student Advisory Committee. It's a powerful thing to have 4 representatives from each of our 6 high schools engaged in discourse around what they're experiencing as student leaders in their buildings and what we as a district need to do to transform. So the easiest and lightest lift thing on my list is to provide a platform for students to be heard and for you, the adults, to learn and grow. I also, you know, think about we have mental health counselors now that emerged after the pandemic, after we were virtual, in every one of our secondary school buildings to support students with their mental health needs, et cetera. So some of these things are not light, but they certainly create a massive impact for what our students' experience is and can be moving into the future.
Yeah, I think there's so much there in you adjust what your services are based upon the students and you called it out earlier, the families, all the stakeholders that you have. You know, education, public education is what it is space. You have the people you have and you support them based on what you hear from them. And I think it's such a simple way to boil it down, but ultimately if you're doing that, you're on the right track. I just want to call out something that Shomari said earlier too, which is, you know, if you're doing any of those things, kudos to you. It's like that we have a real issue, you know, I mean, globally, but particularly in the United States around this idea of all or nothing thinking, where it's like you're doing nothing, you're doing everything, there's nowhere in between. And as long as you're doing something and you're in it for the right why, then, you know, you're on the right path. It doesn't mean you can't do more, but there's a call out from before. And I'm thinking with that, this idea of the mental health counseling and counselors in general, that's a theme that we're seeing a lot too, and particularly giving students opportunities to connect to them. It reminds me of a story out of Tennessee, where we had an alternative school there that implemented a healthy communication curriculum. And in talking to them one time, they said, well, since we've implemented this curriculum, the number of requests to meet with counselors has gone through the roof. What's wrong with our students? It's like the students are the same. They've just come up with a way to communicate now. So is remembering that those thoughts, those needs, they're in the students already. They're there already. You're just bringing them out. You're giving them an opportunity to come out. So appreciate that. I'll give you both a voice break here for a second as we go into our next poll, and we kind of shift more towards the national landscape. So if we could launch the funding poll, Lauren, please. So the federal government, of course, is always, from time immemorial, has been working in you know, more or lesser ways, depending on how you look at it, on this idea of equity. 2020, the Learning Policy Institute identified 4 big picture roles that the federal government really must play in advancing inequity, and they're listed here on the screen. So as you look at this poll, and again, what's your top one? You know, to Shomari's point, it doesn't mean you don't do the others. It's just, what do you feel like is your highest priority? Those of you attending the session, of where the federal government should really point their work. I'll give you a couple of moments to respond to that, but we have that recent announcement, you know, $160 million in grants to support equity, and Miguel Cardona had that quote that, you know, we're investing in schools and communities that have shown a commitment intentionally to intentionally serve students and closing opportunity gaps based particularly on race, was what Cardona was talking about. So this is all part and parcel of this equity work. And I'll give just one more minute here, and we'll end up the poll. Looks like we have pretty good responses, actually, Lawrence. Can on that one share it back. Let's go to Kerrie first. As you look at these responses, pretty even spread in one could argue, but what's your reaction to that?
You're right. I love the fact that we would never say one is, you know, we wouldn't do all of them, because they're all so important as I look at. But I would have to say that in my experience, what makes the best difference, excuse me, or the most difference in that disruption that Shomari was talking about, excuse me, would be the high quality teaching and learning, because that's the point of impact, in my opinion. You know, the point of impact is the teacher and the student, and being able to meet their need, whatever that need is for a student. And at times, our investments aren't always in teaching and learning. Sometimes our investments are outside of that space. And so I would suggest that we continue to focus on that. That's a really key point, especially coming out of the pandemic and teachers learning more about how to deliver a different, more modern version of high quality teaching and learning that may have been different pre-pandemic. To my point about sharing, some of our teachers have been really happy to maintain some of those pieces that they learned during the pandemic when they transitioned very quickly, and they've gone deep into that work. So teaching and learning continues to be a priority. And then, of course, funding schools equitably and adequately is exceptionally important. And we've seen a large investment from the federal government right now because of COVID, but all of us in California, at least, are really concerned about what that looks like at the end of 2024 when all that money goes away. And we've been able to do so many rich opportunities for students and create programs, and to the conversations about counseling and students, and, you know, all these other supports that are in place right now that are fantastic and meeting needs of students, that may go away here soon. And I think we're all challenged with thinking through that.
Let's pull on that for a second. I mean, does that factor into your day-to-day basis? Are you just doing it and we'll worry about that later? Or is there a hesitancy around spending money now that you might not be able to sustain?
We in our district got about $45 million from the federal government to do great things for students post-pandemic. That's a huge sum of money that we would need to recover in the future to do the same things we're doing right now that are meeting needs of students. It's a concern. We're going to peel back a little bit. Again, that goes back to my structure conversation. It's like, breaking the structure is probably one of the most important pieces. But we have to be mindful of that. And in California, we're in ADA LCFF funded districts. Most of them are. And so when you look at that model, that is a concern for school districts. And so you want to provide these rich opportunities for students and talk about and do and enact on what Shomari is talking about. It's just a challenge we have to face. The funding is a concern for many districts.
Yeah. Shomari, what's your thought on that funding piece and also your reaction to the poll results?
This poll, I feel like it's missing some things, but what I will say is that I get confused on how high quality teaching and learning is defined, and who it is intended to serve. Like, we like to say that it serves all, but we don't often say that it serves each and every, which I think is different. The encompassment of all is very generic, rollout or output that does not always include the learners furthest from justice, nor does it always include those who are immigrating to our country or those who have learning gaps or what have you, right? And so, like, our teachers being prepared and their professional learning experience as they roll into this particular profession is so vital. I get a wonderful opportunity to have lots of in-depth conversations with emerging teachers and learning what they don't know about what they should be prepared for as they enter into school systems and districts. And that's a little alarming, so we can say that we're preparing them to become high quality teachers, and the output that they do will hopefully influence high quality learning. But I don't know if we've defined that really well. And I would like to go deeper on that in a future conversation as to what it means and how we get there. I'm sort of big on the one that has no blue at all, the strengthening our education profession, because we're so deficient on people who look like the students we serve now. We're so deficient on cultural relations from the adults to the student, and how important it is for a student and their family to feel connected to who's offering or delivering the learning. And so I think that is a big piece that we really, as an entire field or career field, need to investigate, is how do we continue to enhance who we're bringing into this particular education sector. We're 90-something%, white teachers across the country, as our country is making a, deep divergence from this homogeny that we once were. My district back in the 80s was 80-something% white. Now it's 44% white, right? And so, we have a lot of work to do in that arena. As far as funding is concerned, I do get a little concerned about funding, because we're in the process of hiring a new superintendent now, and I tell people all the time that when it's superintendent hiring time, basically when a new person comes, it's like pressing the reset button. If any of you all remember that old, like the original Nintendo Entertainment System, they had the power button and the reset button. I always think of the school district when we get a new superintendent that's pressing that reset, and the game starts over and everything transforms. And like, fingers crossed, like with great hope, that new person has the energy, the spirit, and the wherewithal to engage in a depth of conversation that helps to bring forth a transformation, not just in the system, but in the experiences that the people are having. And so we didn't get federal funding per se for this body of work. We fund it internally, and it's a part of our general funding. My role and other staff in this organization and monies that we spend towards professional development and other things. But there's a continual and perpetual need to fight and have positionality in this work, because we're competing against so many other things and so many other priorities. Sometimes this priority falls off. And so as long as I'm here, it's going to be a topic that is front of mind, because I'm going to scream about it a lot. But if I were to transition into another role, I do get a little concerned about, A, will they backfill my position? B, will that next person come in with a similar spirit, or will they be a little bit more of what the system is looking for, right? And so lots of things to think about.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for the Nintendo reference. I'll take those any day of the week. But I promise we'll end on a positive note. But let's keep on the negative for a little bit. Kerrie, let's go back to you. Shomari called out very specific barrier there, right? It's like change in leadership and derail an entire program. What are other barriers, whether it's policy or people or anything that comes to mind that are really getting in your way at the moment?
Politics.
Okay.
Because we don't have an equity officer. We don't have someone like Shomari in title, right? So in many districts in Southern California, I'm not unique. We don't have a tremendous number, and I live in Orange County, by the way, so it's basically Disneyland and the surrounding areas, right? And so in Orange County, we do not have seated equity officers in our districts. Yet we have people like me doing equity work. So, when you talk about barriers, one of the things that we have to address is our community and the threshold level of work that we're able to do within the political structure that we live in. While we don't want to play to that, and we don't want to not give students what they need because of that, it is a reality that we live in. And so we're constantly working on how to best inform, that goes back to my comments on community, to best inform and strategize with our community so they understand the work that we're trying to do and why we're doing it. To the conversation around, do we know about high quality teaching, what that is? One of our conversations right now with the community is we're looking at really strategic data. We're looking at our kids. Who do we have that we serve? Our 17,000 students, who are they? And where do they come from? And what do they need? And for some of our larger, greater community in California, that's an uncomfortable conversation. And we're trying to make people more comfortable with that by providing information. So I would probably say right now, that's one of our biggest challenges here is just the political climate that we live in. It doesn't mean we're not going to do the work. It doesn't mean we're not going to try to achieve our goals. It just means we need to be very thoughtful in our approach so that the work is respected and understood so that our students benefit.
Yeah.
Can I say something real quick?
Go ahead,
Mark?
Shomari. Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Kerrie, you knocked it out of the park with that statement. Like, that is so important to understand for folks who are engaging in this work. The politicization of even just the term equity is so unbelievably strong. I almost got taken out because I wanted to institute a equity policy in this system. And in a series of 5 different focus groups or community cafes where we were doing some discovery with our community, the crowd got larger and larger. It went from 120 participants to 600 participants, mostly in opposition to this work. And this is where we lose a lot of our leaders in this effort. It's also where we lose a lot of our superintendents who either don't make it through that storm, or they're not willing to go through that storm. And so the politicization of this effort is strong, and you can see it if you just turn on CNN today. I'm sure, there's this strong opposition to the transformation of providing power to those who haven't had it.
Yeah. And I appreciate both of you again taking that that is what it is mentality of like, I'm just going to support the people that are in front of me. It's tangential, but it was a thought I had the other day. I live just outside New York City and I move a lot and I had to go to the DMV. Everybody has to go to the DMV at some point in their lives. And me sitting there watching English language speakers struggling to communicate with the Spanish language people who were coming to the DMV when I was in the obvious minority. Like I was as a quote unquote English speaker, it was 1 out of 100. And I remember walking out of there thinking that building should be run in Spanish and they should ask me if I need support in English. Like it should be the opposite way around, and it's easy to point fingers, of course. They're not simple solves, but Shomari and Kerrie, you're the people doing that work. You're making that difference. So we appreciate that too. If anybody, we're coming to the end of our time, but if you do have questions that you would like our panelists to answer, now is the time to put them in the QA box. But there's a lot of negative in this, of course. We've also heard a lot of positive too, but as we kind of wind down here towards the end, let's start with Shomari. I'll keep on you if that's okay. What do you want to celebrate? Where have you really felt good about your work when you get home late at night, I'm assuming, and you put your feet wherever your feet go when you get home? What do you reflect on? You're like, that's something that I did today to make a difference.
If at the end of the day, I can get positive feedback from students, our key stakeholder, based on something that I or we, my team or my organization has done to serve and support them well or better than what they have been being supported, then I feel really good. I have lots of incredible and engaging opportunities to listen to and learn from our young people. And it is so valuable. And if you do not have that in your experience as an educator, please take the opportunity to dedicate a percentage of your time, preferably a good percentage of your time, to tapping into those who we are here to serve on a regular basis. But I feel super proud that every day I get to come to work and do something that makes an impact where I get to say I'm paying it forward. My experience as a young man in Gary, Indiana, and then on to Chicago, Illinois, was one that I wish someone like myself would have been available to provide some navigation and some support through a system that wasn't intended to support me in the way that I need. And so that brings me joy, a lot of joy.
Motivation of, I've been through it, I see what I could have had. There even Gary, Indiana, very, very interesting ends of the spectrum of people that have come out of Gary, Indiana. So right. That was the Jacksons came from Gary, Indiana. Those of you attending didn't know that. Kerrie, I'm gonna give you a moment too, but we have I see you sort of pop up there. There was one QA item before you go into your sort of positive reflection that I think hits a lot of what you were saying earlier, which is what are the ways that you gain support from community members to get students to support what they need? What are some? So you talked a little bit in general before about how you have these open meetings and pieces like that, but particularly to the perception of equity, kind of jumping off your political statement earlier, what are some specific items that you've done to support your community?
Lots and lots of conversations with groups of parents and explaining to them or sharing examples of really what equity means, because there is a narrative that lives outside of our buildings about what equity is happening around town. Like people have this image of what it is. And when you actually sit with people and you really describe the student, the need, the circumstance, and you say, this is why I'm doing this. This is why we're moving toward this goal in this program, is because we have students who need X, Y, or Z. When we look at English language learners in California, when we know that we have over 36% of our students who've been a long-term English learner for their entire life, and they've been with us for their entire life. Like, how does that happen? So we have these conversations with the community to explain to them that we need to make these program shifts or these investments and place our resources in the right place to move this group along. without leaving another group out of it. And so what we've done is it's been a lot of sharing conversation, and an overused word, but transparency, really putting stuff out there to the community and inviting them in, and listening to the critical ear. I mean, it's very painful at times to listen to, excuse me, the criticisms of the work that we're trying to achieve for students. But as a leader in my district, that's something I have to listen to and absorb and process, and continue to find ways to share that with them.
Thank you. Yeah, the act of listening alone oftentimes is that core skill. I'll let you clear your throat there, Kerrie, but I don't know where your feet go at the end of the day, Kerrie, but wherever you put your feet, what do you smile about as you think back about your day? 25
years in, and probably the last 15 in some level of administration and guiding big programs. One of the things that I still do is smile at night. I'm in service of others. It's a commitment I've made a long time ago, and I love every minute of it. But one of the things that I can reflect on every day and weekly is what I do is I'm in schools a lot. So as an executive level leader in our district, I don't spend a lot of time in my building. I was rushing here to get onto this call from one of my high schools. I went to see a high school and middle school this morning and spend some time with principals and teachers and listening to some of the things and ideas that they have. And I'm committed to spending at least an hour of my day somewhere outside this building, learning and talking with others about what we need. And so that fills my cup, because that gives me the drive to come back here into the building and start to do that work and meet and create plans to execute what we need to do out there. There's nothing like seeing a student achieve, seeing a student grow, and seeing a student or listening to a student tell you their story and how their experience here has made a difference. So that's what matters to me.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Shomari, Kerrie, you're doing the work. You wouldn't be here if you weren't experts, so we appreciate your time today. Shomari, I know that like a lot of the population, you're feeling sick right now. Most of my kiddos are home sick too, so let's give you some time to take a break. We appreciate you speaking. I hope there was some really practical application for those of you attending today, but ultimately listening, getting close to the problem, accepting what is in front of you, were major themes that we saw throughout. At Edmentum, we build a lot of different solutions to support homeowner success. We have a lot of services that support things like foundational skill instruction and bringing as many opportunities as possible to students. So you can always check out more of our on the diversity and inclusion section of our website as well. We have recorded this. It's over. We've done it. We got there. We've recorded it. We'll send out the recording here later today, along with a survey that'll pop up right as you lead the event. Our next event in the Perspective series will be on evaluating and streamlining EdTech resources. That's on December 14th. I believe we're going to drop the link to that in the chat as well. But we appreciate it, everybody. It's especially those of you in the chat who were going back and forth during the session too. Lots of polarizing opinions, lots of discussion, but ultimately the fact that we're talking to each other is really what matters. So we appreciate your time, everybody who attended today, as well as our panelists, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks all.